All right, let's begin today with a question. And I think it's one that almost every human being can answer. It's a question that's so obvious, no one really thinks to ask it out loud. What's the most exciting part of your day? In other words, what intrigues you? What entices a smile? What gets you up out of bed or off the couch? Or if you're like me at some points in my life, if you suffer from debilitating depression or injury of some kind, what is it that might prompt, in theory, the possibility of healing? My answer to all these very similar questions goes like this. Here we go. What's most exciting for everyone, including you, is the event that might happen. The event that might happen. The event that might happen stimulates, for example, the infant rooting for his mother's breast. Right? The event that infant is hoping for is, of course, that moment of latching on to the mother or to the bottle of milk and receiving nourishment, right? And this event recurs over and over again, and it seems to me the child is taught, right, to expect, right, this event. But let's travel to the other end of the spectrum when the elderly woman at Vista Manor awaits a visit from her son. She's in her late 80s. And she's waiting. Where is my son? She's waiting. The event that might happen is simply the visit of that young man that she still imagines is young, right? Her baby walking through the door. The ETMH, the event that might happen. That's the thing that tunes us in. That's the thing that keeps us going. And so, what I want to talk to you about today, this season of the year, is Judas. What's the event that might happen, that he believes might happen? And it seems to me this event that he imagines will happen is very different than the event that Jesus is aspiring to. Judas, right, as we've heard, is a politically motivated, zealous disciple. And what he's about to do is force Jesus into his plan. He's trying to compel Jesus to fit into the event that Judas imagines might happen. Unfortunately, the problem with our ETMHs, our events that might happen, is that they might not happen. And when the outcome we hoped for doesn't come to fruition, it can be hell. A living hell, or at least a nightmare. What's the worst thing that can happen? Have you ever had anyone say that to you? What's the worst thing that can happen when I go 80 miles per hour on Grand Boulevard? What's the worst thing that can happen? When I flirt with my married coworker, what's the worst thing that can happen? What's the worst thing that can happen when I embezzle money from the company? What's the worst thing that can happen when I buy my AR-15 because it's my right under the Constitution? What's the worst thing that can happen when I send that email that I need to send because this person is really bothering me? What's the worst thing that can happen when I cast my vote? What's the worst thing that can happen? In Matthew 26, Judas Iscariot is depicted as a very manipulative, a very calculating thinker. His actions are deliberate, and by all accounts, what he wants to propose is a quid pro quo. You understand that phrase? Is this for that. Okay? He tells the elders and the chief priests, who are the equivalent of our Sandy Messick and Scott Kinderpile and Diane Clinton and Harold, right? I mean, the elders and the chief priests, right? He goes to the authorities and he says, look, I will tell you where Jesus is going to be at a certain time, and in exchange for this information, what do you give me? And they give him wages for about 170 days, right? 30 pieces of silver, the text says. That's the event that Judas thinks will happen and perhaps inspire God to act. Right? I'm really convinced that Judas thought if he could just get Jesus in a conflict with the religious authorities, God would do something. But he was wrong. And it became, for Judas, a living hell. This week, as many of you may have heard, there was a Twitter exchange between the President of the United States and the Saturday Night Live actor Alec Baldwin. You guys hear about this? On the same day, just think about what's going on, the events that are happening. On the same day that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, threatened nuclear strikes, on the same day that Billy Graham died at the age of 99, on the same day that the White House literally lost hope, namely Hope Hicks, this very insecure man, supported currently by 61% of evangelicals in the United States, it's down 20%, taunted Alec Baldwin. He said to him, I want you to stop mocking me on Saturday Night Live, right? This was the event that the president was thinking about, right? I want you to stop mocking me. But it was not to be. Baldwin did not comply. He later wrote back, agony though it may be, I'd like to hang in there for the impeachment hearings, the resignation speech, their farewell helicopter ride to Mar-a-Lago, you know, the good stuff that we've all been waiting for. Now you see, that's an event too, right, that might happen, right? And I know enough about some of you to realize that perhaps you hold out hope for that too, the good stuff. But even that event is not what God hopes for. You see? Even that event, right, that we might aspire to and say, oh, please, please, end this presidency. Even that is not what God hopes for. God's event that might happen exceeds these things in the passage that I read for you today. God's hope that what might happen exceeds the celebration of Passover, the conspiracy to arrest Jesus, but not during the festival, and even the noble goal of trying to feed the poor. The event that God wants to happen exceeds all of those goals and events. I want to reflect with you on some of these real quick. First of all, the crowds in Jerusalem were all there for an event to celebrate Passover. And if you recall, Passover is an event worth celebrating, right? It harkens back to the deliverance of the Hebrews from slavery in Egypt. But the problem is, if the event simply becomes a backdrop or a sideshow, right, to things that we do habitually or in a routine way, then we may have lost our focus. In other words, this week, I'm also watching a lot of basketball, right? And I look at the basketball games and I'm like, yeah, dunk that basketball. Woohoo! You know, and I'm so excited about the event of watching Gonzaga play whoever. But how much excitement do I generate thinking and feeling about God delivering me from slavery? God delivering me from alcoholism that runs in my family. God delivering me from depression that I've struggled with. God delivering me from being angry sometimes just for no good reason. I want to use this season not just to watch a basketball game, as exciting as that is. I want to use this season to say, there's something else here for me. Deliverance from slavery. The second dynamic at play in Matthew 26 is also a matter of focus. The chief priests conspire and collude to arrest Jesus, but did you notice? They say, not during the festival, lest the people rise up and riot. And it just reminds me of all the kind of sophisticated, savvy political moves, right? You know, the president and vice president going to Billy Graham's funeral, right? And God bless America, and all the ways we have to kind of manipulate the religiosity of people in the United States, right? To keep them from rioting. But here's the interesting thing. The crowds are flocking to Jesus with the expectation that he is the long-awaited Messiah. Jesus is popular at this point. But he could care less about that popularity. Whether or not people rise up in moral outrage is not the barometer of hope in the event of Jesus of Nazareth. The hope is not a blip in the number of conversions. The hope is not a spike in the number of Bibles being sold. The event that might happen reaches to this very moment. The fact that Jesus was betrayed and the fact that there wasn't a riot reaches to this very moment. It says the importance of Jesus isn't just as a political movement, even though that's important. The importance of Jesus is a personal transformation. What good will it do if we have all the great political leaders we can think of saying the right things in public, but personally and interpersonally, their lives are crap? Right? Personally and interpersonally, they're domestic violence. Personally and interpersonally, they're acting in ways that are not consistent with their public persona. The event that might happen is that total transformation. And that leads me to the third thing, and this is probably the hardest to hear in the text. There's a woman who appears suddenly at the house of Simon the leper, who was this important figure who was healed by Jesus earlier. And she breaks open a jar of expensive ointment, and she dumps it on his feet and his flesh, right? And it's very scandalous because it's so sensual. And it seems like the disciples are disappointed, right? They shame her. Why this waste? This ointment could have been sold for a large sum of money and the money given to the poor. Isn't that a laudable goal? Isn't that an event that we might hope for? Something God might want to happen? But even here, there's something beyond. a program that might feed every last living, starving soul on the planet. Jesus says, you will always have the poor. And man, it is hard for me to hear him say that. But I wonder, Jesus is in the habit of speaking on multiple levels, right? All the time. And I wonder if he's not being really insightful here. Just for a second, try to imagine if we concocted or created a program that could and does feed every last living person on the planet. And we say, yes, we've done it. What might happen after we've done it? Wouldn't there still be people who are emotionally poor, intellectually poor, perhaps psychologically poor, interpersonally poor? It seems like the event that Jesus hopes to happen is not only the feeding of the